Moves us on to item 8B, presentation of community survey results.
So this is the fun stuff. This is what we've been waiting for forever. So we have Peter Leatherman from, I'm just still going to call you Decision Resources.
It was only 5 years ago.
Okay, it was only 5 years ago, but Peter, we've been working with him and his partner for what?
Not quite 32 years. I looked at 1991. I have a data point on this presentation.
Yes.
So that's about the last time we had
That's why I chuckled, Mr. Mayor.
Never mind.
So the Morris Leatherman Company used to be Decision Resources, has been doing community surveys for us about once every 5 years for the last 32 years. And the great thing about these guys is that they not only have data points that they can compare going back in time for some pretty key areas, but they also they're a statistically significant survey, so we can feel good that the information that's being presented is something that is not just people randomly responding on a web page, but something that there's a pretty in-depth conversation that goes into it. And also, they do surveys for a lot of the other municipalities across the metropolitan area, and also the school districts. So you've done the last few surveys for the school district for the referendums.
For Eastern Carver, yeah.
Yep.
Probably the last 25 years with Eastern Carver too.
Yep. So they have a really good knowledge of Chaska, our school district, our area, and you'll find that Peter's really able to sort of weave a story with what information we have. So just say sit back and relax, and the information that we get tonight is going to be stuff that we spend a pretty considerable amount of time over the next few months really doing more of a deep dive from a communication standpoint into different topic areas. And so we'll be working with Kevin Wright to basically pick some real key topic areas that are coming out of this and dive deeper into what is it saying, but also what does it potentially mean for us as we're going into the future too.
So,
Peter.
so before you start,
Yes.
so I've been around this community for a couple of years. I have never heard anyone tell me they were contacted and did this. How many people do you contact a year?
We'll just start with the methodology right up front. We talk with 400 randomly selected residents across the city. Every once in a while I was at a school district 2 weeks ago where the school board chair had been called. And sometimes when an elected official is called, they say, oh, well, I don't want to participate. No, you're a citizen of the community. You're part of a residential sample. But we always talk with 400 randomly selected residents. We do it via telephone. And everybody wants to know about cell phones. They're included in the sample. This time around in the city, 43% of the households indicated that they were cell phone only households. You had 11% that were landline only. It's a very specific demographic on that, and then the remainder had both landline and cell phone. So at this point in Chaska, it's almost a 50-50 split between households with cell phone, being cell phone only households, and then landline households. So that's the 400. 400 gives us plus or minus 5%, and it's a cost benefit for the city. 400, to get to a plus or minus 4%, you have to talk to 625 people, which increases the cost by 50%, and it's not worth it for the additional percentage points. So for most public bodies that we work with, we do the 400 sample. That way also we can look at differences in demographics, homeowners versus renters, households with children, those sorts of demographic breaks. The survey was conducted towards the end of May and the first part of June. It is a longer survey, not the longest that we've ever done, but the average time on the phone for this survey was 33 minutes. Huh. People spend time. We had 12% on the phone with us for over an hour. That was by their own choice. A lot of historians out there, we call them. What's that? No.
No, I was giving him a high five on it.
I noticed.
Now, I will say, Fred, any questions on the methodology at all? I'm surprised you haven't run into anybody who's been.
Like I said,
They actually called our house this year.
no.
So,
I think I've heard it 2 people over
I
time.
mean,
First time I've
somewhere
ever had
along the
it.
line, somebody would come up to you and say, hey, I got this phone call from,
Yep.
but I have never, ever heard anyone say that they were surveyed.
the best way to mitigate it for the city to be inundated with who are these people, why are they calling me, is this legitimate, is to do an upfront communications push out there, which, working with Kevin, he did, in putting out the press release saying, we've been hired by the city of Chaska has hired the Morris Leatherman Company. So when caller ID comes up, and as much as Morris Leatherman fits on caller ID or on cell phones, you don't get caller ID, you get the number, we leave a message introducing ourselves, and then they're willing to pick it up the next time.
So that brings up a good question. What % answer and participate versus don't?
The overall non-response rate on this was 5.5%. Once we found them at home, and this is not a survey that you sit and say, okay, you have to take it right now or never.
Yeah.
When you have a survey of this length, you make it convenient for the person taking the survey. So over half the calls were done by appointment.
Okay.
When is it convenient for you,
Interesting.
not when it's convenient for my phoners.
Yep.
And that's just how you have to do it when you're doing this sort of
Sure.
survey.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Good to know. I don't know that I've ever had all this explained, how you go about doing it, so thank you for that.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. And I'll say up front as we get into the results, and I sat and met with Matt and Nate before, and in writing up the summary and just reviewing again to present, what the city has managed to do over the last 6 years is really thread the needle on something that's really difficult as you manage growth and still maintain a small town feel. It really is amazing some of the results we're going to see and how well it's done even at a period of rapid growth. And up front, one of the first questions we ask in a survey, and we do these general questions because we haven't talked about anything. We haven't talked about taxes or anything like that. We want to get their opinion up front. How would they rate the quality of life in the community? Now, the overall, when you add the excellent and the good, in most communities, it's over 90%. People aren't going to stay in a community they think is only fair or poor for very long. They're going to look for a different community. This time around, it's 98%. What is different and what's bounced back from 2012 is the excellent rating is up 18 points. And that's what differentiates communities. If everybody's between 90 and 95% favorable, the difference between the excellent rating is between 6% all the way up to 68%. Minnesotans are very difficult graders. They don't get enthusiastic about a lot of things. And so that's where we really monitor the excellent rating, because it goes beyond just saying something's good. You're saying it's excellent here. It's bounced back up to what it was in 2000 and 2005 and the 18-point jump from 2012. But the history, as we go back into 1991, you can see that the 98% combined is the high going back for 27 years. The 56% is the second highest, only 62% positive or excellent in 2000. So it is the trend in the right direction, absolutely, and it's kind of stabilized. That 56% places the city of Chaska over the past 3 years, as Matt indicated. We work with a lot of municipalities across the metro area, and those that we don't, we do a spring and a fall metro survey to kind of have overall results, because we have the luxury here, obviously, with the history to see how the city compares historically, but also it's the comparatives. Where are cities currently? You're among the top 5 communities with the 56%. Sometimes city managers ask, can we see all the labels and everything like that? And we did it a long time ago, and some of the cities at the bottom were very unhappy. But you're in the top 5, that 56% enthusiasm.
You keep on asking the question every time.
You'll get the answer. Now, when they're evaluating the quality of life, this question captures what they're thinking. What do they like most about the community? And you can see the attributes. This is open-ended. They tell us what they like, and we collapse them down into categories. It's small town values is what they're resonating to at the top of the mind. From what leads the list, the small town feel at 19%, the connection, the friendly people, 17%, quiet and peaceful, open space nature, safe. You finally get a suburban response of housing and neighborhood at 8%. But those top 6 account for a majority of what residents value in the community. It really is the small town values is what they're ascribing and rating that quality of life at 56%. Excellent. Now, if we ask what the like most, we should follow up with what's the most serious issue facing the community. Now, the good news is there's nothing that we classify as a major concern. The bad news is there's lots of concerns, but nothing rising to a threshold in an open-ended response. We typically set the threshold at 20%. When 1 in 5 in an open-ended coalesce around one response, we consider it to be a significant result at this point in time. You don't even have anything that hits double digits. And you see the first kind of discussion on pro-growth, anti-growth in the community, with too much growth leading the list, but it's only at 9%. High taxes is extraordinarily low in what we're seeing across the metro area right now. Over the past 18 months, the norm on that's been between 15 and 20%. And we're going to look at taxes more specifically a little bit later on. Then we have too much road construction, and we have the other side of the anti-growth. You're lacking businesses, and we're going to look at some specific interests on business coming in here. But you can see it's all down, then we go with single digits. It's one of those things where you come into a city and you say, you really don't have to fix a major problem out there in the minds of the community. You're kind of like fine-tuning the FM dial on the radio for folks on a plethora of things to keep in mind. At the bottom, you have 12% that said, I'm sure I could think of anything, but not off the top of my mind. That's the unsure. And 12% said absolutely nothing. It's utopia in the city of Chaska. That's about 50% higher. Norm on that is 8%. So 1 in 8 are what we would classify as boosters in the community. They see no problems. And they obviously then, throughout the survey, rate the city very highly, from the governance to the communication to spending policy. The general direction the city is headed. Now, this is the high since 2000, and it's the high that we have in the metro area over the past 18 months. 94% said the city is going in the right direction. Only 5% said it's off on the wrong track. Just an extraordinary result. And you can see you kind of were at that 80% level since 2000, and now all of a sudden up to 94%. Very strong endorsement of the direction that the city's moving. What about their feelings about the city? Is the city of Chaska just home, or is it home, or just a place to live? You're now at the high. It's been pretty stable at about 3/4 to 80%. Now 82%, the high, say this is home. 18%, just a place to live. So there's more connection in the community, which comes in even at a stronger point on the next question. Overall, how would they rate the strength of community identity? This is an extraordinary result in the jump in the excellent rating. At a time as the city continues to grow, you have a much higher, it's gone from 18% to 46% of people saying the community identity is excellent here. 91% rating it favorably, only 10% only fair or poor. And keeping in mind those core values, community identity is important when you value the small town attributes so much. So the city not only has managed, threaded the needle on managing growth and still keeping the perception and those attributes that are so important to people of the small town. Do they feel accepted, valued, and welcomed in the city of Chaska? Absolutely. 96% yes, said yes, only 2% said no. What's the overall perception of the community? If we go back to the red bar on this, 2005, 29% said the city of Chaska was a small town, 47% said it was a suburban community. 13 years later, it's flipped. 48% view Chaska as a small town, 27% view it as a suburban community, and you've had this consistent 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people see it as both. But the perception, and that's what I'm talking about, is the expectations of a small town have not been lost as growth has continued to occur. Let's talk about taxes. We saw up front on the most serious issue facing the community, it wasn't a top of the mind response like we've seen across the metro area. So what is their overall thought on what percent they think goes to the city? Your folks are very educated. I believe the exact number was 27%. And we told them that after we asked the question, because people always want to know once they tell you what the range is. 34% were between 21 and 30%, 21% were less than 20%, 22% were above 30%. So there really is a high level of information out here on what the actual percent of taxes going towards the city versus the county and the school district. So then you can say that their perception on taxes, perception on taxes doesn't necessarily always line up with the actual fact about taxes. It is a perception. But there is a good level of knowledge in the electorate, in the residents, about what their actual property taxes going to the city are. And if we look at this question now on their perception of overall property taxes, you have 31% saying they're very high or somewhat high, 56% said about average, 5% said somewhat low. We have their names and numbers, and 9% were unsure. We would classify the property tax climate in Chaska as benign. The threshold that we use to have a hostile tax climate right now is 50%, very high and somewhat high. You can see that you're at 31%. You're one of a few communities that we label as benign. What's the high on this right now? Everybody wants to know. I won't say the city. It's a northwest Hennepin suburb, 77%, very high and somewhat high. That's a very difficult property tax environment. So that's people's perception of taxes in the city. Now, how do they feel about property tax increases? Well, they're split. It depends on what it's used for. The dark gold color is, would you support a property tax increase to maintain city services? 68% say absolutely. 25% oppose that. How about, would you support a property tax increase to improve or expand city services? No, not that interested, 35 to 60%. So they are willing to invest to maintain what they have in improvement or enhancement property tax. The devil would be in the details of what it's going to be used for. Now, when the rubber hits the road, and to me this is a key question in the city survey, because we ask people to consider the taxes they pay and the quality of the services they receive, and how do they rate that value. And even if their perception of taxes are very high or somewhat high, keeping in mind you had 31% say they thought their city property taxes were very high or somewhat high. You only had 10% rate the value as only fair, and nobody said poor. So even if they thought there was a perception that their taxes were high, the services being provided by the city nets out as a positive value in their mind. You actually have the high since 2000 in the excellent rating, 1 in 5, and a total of 87% saying the value is excellent or good. Extraordinarily high in comparison to the metro. And historically, it's at the high that we have on this question for you. It's gone everywhere from 68% now to 87% rating that value as a positive on the quality of the city services.
I think I started in 2006. Just saying.
Everybody likes to set their flag when they see the timeline on data.
Don't pull a muscle pat yourself on the back.
Now, the overall evaluation of city services, we've asked about it broadly as they look at the comparison with taxes and the services. Individually, now I won't go through this entire list, but what we want to see is a sea of blue instead of a red riptide. and that's precisely what we see. Now, the percents don't add up to 100% because some people are saying, I don't have enough information. Upkeep and maintenance on the par 30% haven't used it or haven't talked to anybody who's used it and doesn't have any opinion on it. So that's why it doesn't add to 100%. The overall aggregate, if we normalize this, take out the uncertainty and look at the positive to the negative, is just under 84% positive across this list, which places the city among the top 5 as an aggregate city service rating score. One thing I will point out, because everybody always looks to see what's the longest red bar. Okay, your longest red bar is the longest red bar in every city, street repair and maintenance. Now, the 73 to 27 is your lowest rated, but currently across the metro area, the norm on this is 60% favorable to 40% unfavorable. So you are better than the norm by 13 points on a key city service of street repair and maintenance.
But it's interesting that we've actually internally ranked that as one of our areas that need improvement. I mean, that's why we put so much money into street reconstruction.
It validates that decision, yes. Now, the overall city service priorities, we've gone through the list again, and we've asked them, is this city service essential, very important, somewhat important, not too important, or not at all important? What I've decided to array for this is the essential and the very important. You can see, for the most part, everything was at least a majority of folks thought the service was very important. But there really is truly a clear hierarchy. It's not surprising. If you look at the top of the list, it's fire, it's police, dependability of city water, EMS, sanitary sewer, quality of city water, and electric service, 80%, with the public safety and the dependability of city water being over 90% essential. Almost a complete 100% saying it's at least very important.
I'm surprised electric is that low.
I was surprised the snow plowing was that low as well.
It's still, though, 96% of people still said it's at least very important.
Good point. Yeah.
You know, it's just that difference between, you're really looking at nuances, and that's why I display it this way, for that essential versus very important.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, there's still the categories of somewhat or not too important that aren't arrayed up there. You know, and then we typically see what other cities see when they look at this. Park and Rec on an importance priority for city services is lower. They just have more specific constituencies, whether it's golf courses, curling, those sorts of things. But this is just to give you an idea of what people set as priorities for services. One more time through the list.
I think Luke's having some problems back there.
Funding of city services. Going through the list, and this is just as a prioritization. Where are people's minds on the use of funding? And this is where that question that we asked, just blanket to maintain or expand and enhance, this gives you, there is flexibility on what the funds would be used for, whether they're willing to see additional funds used. It's set up like a stoplight. Green, they would be willing to accept an increase. Yellow, maintain. Red, you can cut or eliminate. And there were very few people saying cut, I just collapse it, or I would say eliminate. Most of them said if you had to put cuts in. And I always tell councils and administration as they look at this, this is meant to give you priorities. And so if you look at the increase versus the cut and eliminate category, so on police service, 34% indicate that they would support an increase, only 1% cut and eliminate. So it's a plus 33 for an enhancement of police service from property taxes. Going down to say the quality of city water, the dependability of city water, street repair and maintenance, a plus 30 to give you that prioritization. On the flip side, though, you do see what you would expect to see with the importance of services with specific constituents, especially the golf courses and the curling. But it lines up with if you look at their overall rating on those key services that they deem important, the fire, police, they're extraordinarily highly rated, and people, a percent, about a third of the population is willing to invest more in those services. Electricity rates really has changed perception since 2000. In 2000, 41% thought the electricity rates in the city were very high or somewhat high. Only 42% said about average. It's now come back to what it was in 2012 again. 23% said they were high, 66% about average, 7% low. Their concern on electricity rates has mitigated quite a bit since 2000. And once again, being classification, it's a benign environment on the perception of electricity rates. The key question as you grow is, do they feel that the quality of city services have kept pace with the growth? Absolutely. 92% indicate yes, it has. Only 7% said no, it's not. Oh, a topic that's a survey stopper.
Wow. Holy moly.
Yeah,
The importance of choosing your garbage hauler.
it's a odd one.
Almost even.
48% think it's a constitutional right.
How we can fill the place. with
It's
the
either very important or somewhat important to be able to choose your garbage hauler. 48% don't think it is. The community's divided on the importance of the ability to choose. It's not surprising.
amazing?
We see this in
Why we
community
can
after
fill the place
community.
when we talk about
Anywhere between 50 to 60% in any community believe it is
You're never
their
gonna
right to be
satisfy
able to
it.
choose their garbage hauler. Now, what we do have is we're one of a few cities that actually hit 50% saying that they would support organized garbage collection.
Surprised about that.
Now, it is not something, though, and a policy issue, I always tell clients, you look at the intense groups, those strongly favored and those strongly opposed, they're about equal, 23%, 19%. You have 15% unsure. So it's a policy that I would say perhaps is not ripe in light of the previous slide where half the community believes that it's important to choose your hauler, half believe it is not important to choose your hauler. It is growing. The norm on this right now, it started, we asked this question, this issue started coming up 12, 15 years ago. It was about 35% support, 60% opposed. It's now about 40 to 45% support to about 40, 45% opposed. So you are one of a few with a flat majority. Well, it's not a majority, it's 50%. We have 50% plus one. There's a flat majority. So it's not ripe at this point in time. And part of it is, and what has changed this going back through the years when it was 2-1 against, is the discussion, and we go through the list and we ask, do you believe that garbage collection in an open system or organized system, is the cost for street repair better? 67% believe it's better in an organized collection system. Pollution from trucks, 74% believe it's better in an organized collection. But on the other side, you have not only the right to choose your hauler, but the perception still tips. It's narrower, but people still believe on cost and customer service, it's better in an open system. So the issue perhaps is gaining traction, but it's not at this point ripe.
Part of it is they don't know what they don't know either.
That's right.
That is absolutely it.
Anything, and
The interesting thing I found about this, though, is that people know that the streets take more of a beating and that there's more pollution, but they still said they didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
because they want to
They'd rather
pull the
pay for
cost.
street.
They feel they can do a better cost
But they'll
than what
get,
the city would be.
they'll get a better cost if it's organized.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it's bid every, whatever your,
But it's perception, and that's
Right.
what the
Yeah.
perception is currently.
And there are, in every community, there's typically between 20 and 30% of people, they have personal relationships with their garbage haulers. I mean, Christmas cards, those sorts of things. And they worry that, it's a different question if you're going to choose their hauler. If you go organized and you choose the hauler that they have, then they might be willing to have a discussion. But there's a quarter of people out there that,
And I think that's getting less and less. I think there was a time we had, we had very local haulers that everybody knew by name, and that was, but now they're all being bought out by the big boys. and
Exactly.
There's hardly any small locals left.
Yep.
There's a few, but not many.
yep.
That is an interesting couple
Yeah.
of slides there, though. That's
Worse
pretty-
for everything, but
pretty
I'm not
wild.
gonna do it.
I don't want to be,
fact,
I don't want my road
650.
replaced. but
Especially
I don't care if
67%
it's
on the
me,
cost of
my
road
garbage
repair.
hauler.
They realize it,
amazing.
they know it, but
It's
don't
amazing.
do it.
It doesn't outweigh.
And I would tell you that I'd rather, as far as customer service, if I had to call the city, which would, if we went that type of way, you would get a better customer service than you
Absolutely.
would calling
The hauler.
a big hauler.
Yeah.
I won't say a name like something,
Don't say it.
Yep.
but
One of the big ones.
Must have two names. Something.
Next slide.
how about them twins?
moving right along.
Let's switch to public safety. Perception over the past 2 years on crime, 72% think it's remained about the same. 22% say it's increased, 4% say it's decreased. Once again, like property taxes, crime is a perception. Whether the crime statistics bear that out. Oftentimes, the city will see this result and say, this doesn't accurately reflect what's happening in the community. And then it's a communication, because crime can be localized even if it's outside your borders and it comes in. But 3/4 think crime has remained about the same. Do they feel safe in Chaska? Absolutely. 97-3. 18% indicate they've been victim of a crime during the past year. That's the norm across the metro. It really doesn't matter once you get to the second ring suburbs. Obviously, when we're talking with Minneapolis and St. Paul or first ring suburbs, the norm is higher, about 25 to 30%, but you get second ring and out, it's typically somewhere between 15 and 20%, indicating that they've been victim of a crime. Governance and administration. You're at the high now over the last 16 years on another very important question, and that's people having the ability to have a say, empowerment. The question is asked, other than voting, do you feel you can have a say about the way the city of Chaska runs things? If you go back to 2000, 49% said yes, 40% said no. Now, 71% say yes, 26% say no. The norm on this right now is 60% yes, 35% no. There's been a change now over the years in people confusing the ability to have a say versus have their way. And it has clouded their opinion on this question and driven down the amount of people saying, yes, I feel I can have a say. But at a time that that's happening, it hasn't happened here. That you're at the high since 2000, and you're 11 points higher than the norm we see across the metro area. The job of the mayor and city council,
For that one.
well, I'm just gonna go to the historic. Give you even further going back. You're at the high since 1993 of approval to disapproval. 84% approval this time to 12% disapproval. 4% were unsure. What we look at for this one, and it varies so much, and you can see where some of the variation is going to come in. If you look at the yellow bar, uncertainty varies in some communities. And the threshold that we always use, so we look at ratio of a positive to negative to do a comparison. You're at 84 to 12, 7 to 1. We consider the norm on this to be 3 to 1, positive to negative. So the council is very well regarded, and between 2005 and 2012 is where the council rating went up. I don't know who that relates to, but
Alex, you getting this one?
now,
Do you want him to look up names for the article?
now, Should the mayor's term be changed from 2 years to 4 years? The city, you have a
Interesting.
majority support. It hasn't really changed since 2012. It was 56% in 2012 to 27% opposed, 54% support. This time around to 30%. On a policy issue, it's about 2-to-1, strong favor versus strong opposition. So it hasn't really changed over time. There's still a majority that support changing the mayor's term. Now, changing
Changing it or leaving it the same?
No, changing from a 2 to a 4-year term. What about changing council to an at-large
Here we
system?
go.
This is another issue that's not ripe. Especially the highest percentage is unsure. 35% want more information and to think about what it means. 34% support, 32% opposed. That chart is the pollster's nightmare. It'll give you direction. A third, a third, a third. And if you look at intensity, 14% strongly favor, 16% strongly oppose. It's an issue that is not ripe and more discussion would have to take place to understand the pros and the cons for an at-large system versus a ward system. Job of city staff. I'll leave this up just to say, if we look at the right, 36% have had quite a lot or some firsthand contact with city staff during the past couple of years. I'm going to go to the next chart because it goes back further on the history than that chart, going back to 1991. Like the council, the city staff now is at the high in 27 years, 91 to 8. This, the ratio we look at, is better than 6 to 1. 91 to 8, it's better than 11 to 1. So both the council, the governance side, and the administration side are among the top 5 in the metro area over the past 2 years. And I think a lot of the goodwill for both entities comes from the perceptions of development. Overall, you're at the high water mark now for do they think development across the city is well-planned or not well-planned. 70%, 19% saying not well-planned, and 11% are unsure. What about the pace of development? It switched in 2005, between 2005 and 2012, and it was an interesting switch where it went from the split being between too rapid and about right being equal to basically 60% saying it's about right and the tilt being now not fast enough. You've gone from, and cities go through this as they grow, we call it phase 2 concerns on development. Okay, the development's here, people are coming. Now we're concerned about what other types of things can come in and fill in. And we're going to look at some of those amenities. Those things are job-producing businesses, restaurants, and we're going to look at see some housing. But now, if there's a tip, I mean, overall, a majority of people are satisfied and say the pace of development is about right. But by about 2 to 1 of those having an opinion of it's too fast versus not fast enough, it now tips to not fast enough. And when we look at these characteristics on what they're looking for, this is set up like the city funding as a stoplight. Green, bring in more development. Red, stop, no more of the development. And yellow, you have about the right amount. You can see you have very little red on this chart. Surprisingly, on rental units, those are the highest red you have. At affordable rental units and luxury rental units and executive high-end housing. Those three at 21, 22, and 14%. But on rental units, it actually nets out. There are more people saying to bring more in than less. You have 28% saying increase the amount of affordable rental units, and you have 26% saying increase the amount of luxury rental. So it's not the negative rental units that we see across the metro area normally. Normally, that's a net negative. You have more people saying, we have too many. On the flip side, what are they looking for? There's a theme in the housing on life cycle housing in the community now. And this happens, and it's a good effect of having such a high quality of life ratings. People now are concerned about where will their kids live when they move back to the community when they go off to college. And so you have 38% saying you need more starter homes. You have 38% saying more affordable housing. And that was stated in the survey as housing costing $220,000. It was given a definition of affordable housing. And people talked about that, a place for my children to live. On the other side of the life cycle housing is a concern as people downsize and get older, is there a place for them to live with assisted living and one-level senior housing? So it's kind of the life cycle. People want to stay here now. They love the quality of life, and that's the demand in the housing market at this point in time amongst residents. Then if we go to the bottom four with the business portion of the development, that's the phase two that communities go through now. A flat majority of people saying they want more, there should be more light manufacturing businesses, and that they're thinking jobs. And entertainment establishments, then service retail and restaurants, 48%. So the question of whether to grow or not to grow has been settled in the minds of most residents. The question now is how to grow and what to fill in those gaps and say fine-tune the infrastructure of the economic development across the city. Where are folks shopping? A third say their principal retail shopping area is Target and Chaska. 17% Chaska Plaza, 11% going to Shakopee, 9% Eden Prairie Mall. And this has obviously changed over time. When we started doing the surveys earlier, you didn't have the businesses here.
In 2000, the question was, people said they wanted more retail development, and the question is what kind of retail, and they didn't even say what kind, they said Target.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they were specific to say we want a Target in the community.
You build it, they will come.
Yep.
The local retail shopping dollar, what percent do they say is spent in the city of Chaska? This has changed a little bit. It's tipped more, and now keep in mind, this is in an environment comparing to 2012 to 2018 where there's much greater reliance on online shopping. So it's not that the competition is from outside the borders and the neighbors on what stores are available. City after city is seeing this, that the competition is either buying here or buying online. It tips a little more. You have 5% more. You have 36% total saying that they spend 50% or more of their dollar in comparison to 31% 6 years ago. What about the frequency of their purchases, their local retail purchases? It's upticked a little bit in a time of the online competition. Where cities see the decline, you necessarily haven't, and a lot of that has to do with the growth that's happened over the 6 years and the types of options that they have available in the community.
And also, we don't have a big mall. I mean, that's where you're seeing the real big impacts negatively.
The real, yeah, absolutely, the communities with the big mall. And so when you ask them just to think about the amount of purchases in Chaska compared to 3 years ago, 37% say it has increased, 9% decreased, and 54% have remained about the same. What about restaurants? Percent of meals eaten out in Chaska, an uptick in those saying no meals eaten out in Chaska, but that actually is more people saying they don't eat out, period, in essence. You do have, though, about 23% saying that they eat 25% of their meals out in Chaska in comparison to elsewhere. Now, what percent of their dollar is spent in Chaska? You have an uptick in the nothing, obviously correlating to not eating out. Less of a dollar is being spent. So now, instead of being at 42%, saying 25% or more, it's 31%. And if you go back, that's why you have the demand in that characteristics chart with 48% saying, bring more dining options to us. And when we asked the question then, if there were more options for restaurants in the community, would it increase your dining? 50% said yes, 47% said no. Now, the question's going to be what restaurants to bring. I thought I fixed the error on that.
The error is?
In the label.
In the center, it says error.
It says error as a label. For some reason it came up, I thought I'll give you the exact, but needless to say,
Okay.
there's no consensus on precisely what sort of option. Family style leads the list at 13%, 9% fine dining, then we have all sorts of different ethnic, fast food, steakhouse. It's interesting, keeping in mind that 47% say more restaurant options wouldn't increase their dining in Chaska. Only 17% said that they don't see any need for any restaurant whatsoever. And 13% were unsure. 70% of people still had an idea of what sort of restaurant they would like in Chaska. Now, this is not atypical when you're in a growth area and demand increases. Still, if you look at Burnsville, they still have 30 to 40% of people saying they don't have enough restaurants. Ridgedale, Roseville, and Minnetonka. I don't know what kind of restaurants they could bring in that they don't have, but it is an insatiable demand. But really, when you have half the people saying, I would dine out more, the key is finding something that fits the bill for most of them. The perception of downtown and the development. 53% see the quality of development as improving the downtown. 6% say it's declined. 39% say it's remained about the same. A flat majority say over the time, the development in downtown and the quality has been improving. The importance on revitalizing downtown can't be understated. You almost have a flat majority saying it's very important, with 35% saying it's somewhat important. 83% of the community then says that the revitalization of downtown is at least somewhat important to them. Only 17% said not to or not at all. Now, frequency to downtown with visits to downtown, a little bit of it's kind of tipped, a little bit more visits downtown over the past couple of years. Last time, 24% indicated they rarely or never came. It's down to 20% saying rarely or never. It's kind of the sweet spot is somewhere between 2 to 3 to 4 times a month they're coming down. Not quite weekly, not quite every other week is the typical visit to downtown. Now, what's the primary purpose of coming downtown? 41% indicate it was for shopping, 14% services, 11% just to mill about, 11% dining, parks, trails, work, exercise, everything. But the primary reason for coming downtown at this point in time is shopping. What's missing? Well, restaurants. Only 13% point specifically to restaurants. 56% said they really didn't think that there were any specific establishments that are missing in downtown. So it's once again fine-tuning things instead of filling in an obvious gap in the minds of residents. How about the use of developmental financial incentives? Yep. It hasn't changed. It's actually more strong on the intensity. It was 82% in 2012 supported the city using financial incentives for development. It's 81% now, but the strong support has moved to statistically significant from 22 to 29%. Only 13% oppose the use of financial incentives for development. The Carver County Library, 61% indicated that they or members of their household had used the library during the past couple of years. 39% indicated they had not. In following up with the 39% that said no, asking why they haven't used the library, those reasons are arrayed on the right side of the chart. And the key reason, 32% of them indicated they had no interest. Then you have the electronic aspect of how people read now, with reading ebooks or use the internet at a combined 32%. 4%, I'm one of them, still buy the books. Really underrepresented. 7% no time, 12% no need. So it really is kind of a divide now amongst non-users of really they're not readers versus they're reading in different ways, and they don't see the library necessarily fulfilling it through electronic or e-readers. How does the community feel about the expansion of the Chaska Library? 81% support the expansion, 12% oppose the expansion. As a policy issue, if you look at the intensity, 37% strongly support, 2% strongly oppose. Now, it's important to say that this is in concept. There were no dollar figures attached. There were no specific plans. This is finding at the outset, and we typically do this when we work on referendums. You want to find if something is feasible in concept before you dive deeper into it. And so this definitely indicates the community is interested in this conversation. You know, it will matter in the details. How important is the expansion be in downtown Chaska? 64% said it's at least somewhat important. 29% said it's very important. Only 33% said it didn't matter. It was not to or not at all important. Now, continuing on the expansion, how likely would their household be to use an expanded library? Well, keeping in mind that 61% indicated that they are members of their household use the library, you now have 67% saying they're either very or somewhat likely to use it. And people kind of hedge on this because with the question of should it be in downtown or not downtown, the location will matter. You know, it's going to, people say it's going to depend. Now, the question then we follow up on referendum typically is, what level of a property tax increase would you support to expand the library? Now, keeping in mind you had 84% support in concept. 27% of the community said I wouldn't support any dollar amount. If this was a referendum, that's actually below the norm that we see on this question. The typical range for people saying that they support nothing for a school district referendum or a park bond referendum is 30 to 35% at the outset. You call it the core opposition. So it's under. It comes in, the average, roughly $4 to $5 a month would be reasonable at the outset. Now, the devil will be in the details, and the location would matter, what's being included. But the conversation is definitely, the community is ready to have the conversation and willing to have the conversation and willing to invest in a potential expansion if it comes to fruition. Park and rec facilities. 34% rate them excellent, 60% good, 4% only fair, nobody said poor. 94 to 4, top of the range in comparison to Metro on the overall rating of park and recreation facilities. Household use, very strong household use, not surprising with the demographics in the community, the amount of households with children. 39% indicated that they are members of their household at some point over the past few years have participated in a recreation program. I always joke with you have a 99% satisfaction rate that there is room to improve. But there's not much room to improve. You have very high usage and extraordinarily high satisfaction on the rec programs. So then an overall evaluation, do they feel that the mix of recreation programs meets the needs of their household? 91% yes, said yes, it does. Do the park and recreation amenities meet the needs of their household? 93% indicate that they do. So if you're looking at the breadth and if you're looking at the quality and the usage of facilities and programming, the city checks the box on all of those key findings. Travel, ease of getting around Chaska itself.
They didn't ask this question last week.
Right.
I'm not sure, was 41 torn up at the time?
Maybe
Yeah.
revisit it and ask it in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Oh, after tomorrow.
You still had people in a good humor. 87% said it was excellent or good, 12% only fair. The excellent rating, 1 in 4 people said that travel within the city was not a problem. How do they normally get around the community? 84% use a car, 8% walk, 7% bicycle. 56% indicate that they leave Chaska on a regular basis. 26% indicate they did not. They worked within the city, and then 18% were not employed or retired. Of the 56% that leave Chaska on a regular basis, the rating of the commute was much higher than I thought it would be. And it's much higher than if we go back to before 212, opened up all
He
those.
says that because he has to drive out here for meetings.
Yes. I love 212. The 82% excellent and good, 18% only fair. Public transit, 41% indicated they or a member of their household had used public transit during the past 2 years. The rating on the experience, extraordinarily high. Southwest Transit, 55% excellent, combined 93% excellent and good. Awareness of Southwest Transit, well, we had 44% or 41% indicated that they had used public transit. The awareness increased quite a bit. 69% said they were aware. And even then, you're tapping into the grapevine then. Not necessarily their own personal use of the system, but what are they hearing? And this nets out positive, as opposed to some of the other public transit systems that when you're tapping into the grapevine, going beyond users to what they hear about the particular service, Southwest Transit is very well regarded within that. Of the 70% of residents aware, 86% rate the service favorably. And then finally, communications.
Kevin?
And this is
He's new, he's new.
I see an uptick there, though. And excellent.
You got the gift card? No. This is an important point to make with all the news you've seen and in a positive light. Sometimes you would say potentially residents aren't as connected as they had been. And that is simply not the case. It was 81%, you now have 82%, a doubling in the excellent rating of the overall communications coming from the city. So residents really feel good across the board, and they're doing it with a higher level of information, at least self-described higher levels of information. Now, where are they getting information? The light blue bar is them telling us what their primary source of information is. So the Chaska Herald at 37%.
How about that, Alex?
Look at that pop up.
Here you go.
The city website at 34%, and then everything pales. It's 71% of communication is either the Herald or the website. Now, the dark blue bar is how they would prefer to receive information. So the Chaska Herald goes down to 30, the city website goes down to 21. Now mailings jump up. They want specific mailings when an issue comes up, nothing broad, and then email comes up. If we look and kind of put them into pots versus written versus electronic, the community's divided in how they want to receive information. About 45% are interested in some sort of written, about 45% are interested in electronic. So the need for communications to still straddle that line will be necessary for the upcoming few years. Cable television, 59% indicated that they had cable, 27% satellite, and the neither is up to 14%. 1 in 7 would be the cord cutters, shall we say. Viewership of city council meetings.
That can't be true. We have 2.1 million viewers. How can that be?
Well, spouses may be watching.
Oh.
But no, it's,
I doubt they are.
you have 8% saying frequently and occasionally. And sometimes, I always joke with councils though, the higher the ratings of council meetings oftentimes indicate a much
more
higher level of
controversy?
dysfunction
Oh, yeah,
on a council. Yeah, the highest ratings we ever had was before I started surveying back in '94. This was in the '80s when a certain former governor was mayor of Brooklyn Park and firing city managers on camera. That was must-see TV. You know, the frequent and occasionally was 45, 50%. It had greater ratings than Seinfeld at the time. So it's out there. They feel that if they need to, they can access it. But there's nothing that rises to the fact that they need to watch at this point in time. They're very content with how things are. The website, 93% indicate that they had access to the internet. You only have 7% now that have no internet access. 72% of the 93% said that they had accessed the city's website, so about just under 70% of the community as a whole, and 94% found what they sought. So however what's ever been done, that is extraordinarily high on a website being able to find. The threshold on that one is 80% of people that access a website being able to find what they're looking for. And then finally, social media. I set this up, it's a two-part question. First off, do they use the social media? What's arrayed are the users. So 83% of the community uses Facebook. The second part of the question is, how likely would you be to use that social media source to access city information? That's then 63% of the community saying that they would use that Facebook for that. YouTube, 68% watch YouTube, 45% would you watch or access city information via YouTube, then Twitter, then Instagram, and then blogs specifically. There's a key, obviously dominant with Facebook, followed by YouTube, and Twitter over the past couple years, because of national usage of Twitter, has gone down. That used to be a very solid second place. And people now have become more uncomfortable with using it as a way to gather information, simply because you can't go as in-depth as you can in other veins of social media. So there was a lot of information. I'd be happy to answer any more questions you might have.
So can we get a single hauler or not?
Depends if you want to upset.
They're not ripe for that yet. It's working on them.
Yeah.
I think it's something that warrants conversation, especially when the perception, you know, on cost and street maintenance and everything, it is there. But that tension and that right to
You
choose
don't have
your
to go
hauler.
too deep. I was just playing with you.
You know, most communities that
Nobody's, after seeing this, nobody's watching anyway, so I'm not getting my message out. Well, I tell you what, I mean, we've had a couple really tough council meetings, over the last month, and this is it's very nice to get news like this, and to hear our comparisons to where we sit in the metro area and our ratings and things like that. It's, you know, it just it tells us that
We're on the right track.
our hard work is starting to pay off and it's starting to show. And we've had a couple, like I said, over the last month, we've had a couple tough council meetings, but this group over the last 5 years has made some tough and critical decisions. And I'm not only talking us, I'm talking staff, everyone included. The whole city of Chaska has made some big decisions, and to me, this is telling us that the things we've done, some of them have been gambles, have paid off. And that's really encouraging, and it's great news for once to come out of here and feel good.
That's the only way to look at it, is it does validate decisions that have been made in the past, because poor decisions will come up in a survey like this when you're gauging public opinion. And with the benefit, I mean, there are very few communities, some of the data I put up here, I've been with the company since '94, predates me. And so you have the luxury of comparison of history, and it's doing extraordinarily well in comparison to history, and then the very strong comparisons to what we're seeing with trends over the metro area over the past 18 to 24 months does validate a lot of the things that have happened in the city in the next 5 to 6 years.
Now, from all of your notes, how you explained how we compared, we're in the top 5 and that, do we get that, or is that just your commentary that goes along with this?
Yeah.
Not the city names.
Yeah, yeah. You won't get the chart with saying yes. But it is, and with the summary that we write up, we talk about some of the key issues.
Because I think that,
Top deciles.
you know, it's awesome that you shared it here, but like I said,
You saw what
other
President
than
watched this.
the 5 that weren't at the fire station and us sitting here, we're the only ones that saw it.
Yeah.
Right.
And it'd be great, like,
Because Alex is here.
oh, that's right,
Yeah.
that's our high.
That's our number one
That's our
source.
number one source of
And she
information.
still has job security.
But,
There we go.
but I think it's also nice that when we have our employee appreciation, that some of these numbers, obviously Matt would love to go over this for like 7 hours, but we could probably narrow it down to like a 15 minutes
precedes me.
about the good things that, but I mean, you talk about the services that our employees are showing. Those are the things that when you get it on a survey from the residents, those are the things that you want to put out at employee recognition. And I don't want Matt to blow it, so that's why I was wondering if you had those. Is it kind of picking on you night tonight or what?
Yeah, you're spreading it around.
But
Not that I would think that Matt would blow it, Mr.
No,
Mayor.
he wouldn't.
But
that's what I was wondering.
It's oftentimes when a city falls into, you know, what we would classify kind of as the best practices, they oftentimes want this news shared with staff. And I'm more than willing to come out at a staff meeting when it's convenient and do a 15, 20-minute, you know, they don't necessarily need to hear about garbage hauling and
Right.
2 to 4 year
No, I
terms for the
think
mayor.
it'd be important.
But to give it context and share, because
Yeah.
I think staff hears from the 10% that
Right.
are unhappy.
Yeah,
I
the
think
other-
it's a-
well, I was gonna say, the other part of it is the whole reason that we don't do these surveys internally, there's a credibility issue. I mean, it's not real credible for us to go out and do a survey and come up with, I
We
mean.
can
it-
come out and say how good we are all day long, but this is living proof of it.
and so,
Independent.
yeah, so I agree with you.
But I think it also goes back to like, for Kevin, for instance, who I pick on because he's sitting here, it tells him which social media sources are the strong sources to use. So it hits so many different people, but a different way.
Right.
So I'm not sure what the public works guys might like the thing about the haulers because they might not do as much damage to the street. So everybody takes information a different way.
Absolutely.
And I mean, obviously, we'd have to pick this pieces and parts because there's no way we would do this at a employee recognition and
No.
taking that much time. They get too antsy.
I think there's some definite key slides in there. that
Absolutely.
You could share.
Without a
us.
doubt.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that really speaks highly upon what they do on a day-in, day-out basis.
Yep. Without a doubt.
Yep. And I certainly appreciated, you know, taking the time to explain what the different things, the nuances meant, but also some of the comparisons that you said across the metro. That was very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a
Luke, I
pleasure.
think you look like you have
My
something.
question was that what the people liked about the city of Chaska. 17% was a small-town feel. Schools were way down at like 7%. But I read someplace not long ago that our school district was in the top 4% in the nation. And I thought that was important to people, to buying homes here and that. And I would have thought that would be higher, or is that because it was the city of Chaska was doing the survey?
Part of it is when you say that, because in order to get through, it's not a blind survey, so we want to tell them we've been retained by the city of Chaska. So they tend to think city versus school.
Okay.
Some cities will delve into more to understand the quality of life aspects, the quality of schools, public safety, other items, and ask importance and ratings and everything like that. And it's always public safety and schools at the top of the list for importance overall. But it does tip when you're looking at this is the population as a whole. And we have, this time around, that we had 61% that were empty nesters. So 39% in the sample had kids. So that in and of itself limits it. And that is only coding the first response. I mean, I mentioned we had 12% stay on the phone with us for over an hour. They probably listed 6 things. What we code is the first thing that comes to mind, and then that's what's arrayed on it. So, I mean, schools are a core value, but normally on a city survey, you have to cue them on public schools to think, because most people think separately between city and school district.
I don't know, anybody else have questions?
No questions. It was just really a lot of interesting information. I mean, there was,
It's interesting. I
you know,
don't,
some of your insight behind some of those slides as well was very helpful as well. Appreciate that. And it was, I don't know, it just really kind of pretty incredible. I mean,
Yeah,
there's really
like I
a
said.
ton of information there that really said a lot, you know. I mean, I was really
quite
impressed
frankly,
with
that's
how
why
that,
we've
how
always-
those questions, all those questions came across and what.
That's why we have gone back and utilized these guys for so long, is that they know what they're doing, they know how to get the responses from people, and then how to interpret what's being said, and then have that comparison to the rest of the metro area. I mean, I think that's all those things are really critical if you're going to have a story to tell. Otherwise, it's just you're looking at things in just a bubble or a vacuum.
but I like the history.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
that to go
Looking at
back
the
so many
trends.
years.
You were watching when other mayors were, what it was, the comparison to other
Well,
mayors.
Ripke, he can talk community all day long. We're winning that battle. On camera?
Really loud.
Oh, boy.
On camera.
1% are watching
Uh-oh.
frequently.
There's your 1% right there.
Hey, Mike, how you doing at editing?
And also, thanks, Matt, for having this come back on a meeting that was a little
Yeah.
quieter,
Well, I
because some of those
just-
other
I
ones.
mean-
Yeah, it was
Too much information to do on one of those late
I
nights.
mean, you can see
so.
we spent hour
Oh,
and
yeah.
15 minutes here. I mean, this is something this is really important stuff, because, you know, this is good information, but we also have to remember why we did this survey. I mean, it's to understand what people's perceptions are and where we need to improve and what we need to be focused on. But keep in mind, the last retreat that we had, we talked about how are we going to plan for when we're a city that's fully developed, and how do we make sure that we're doing things in the right way. Part of it is a question about the perception of how do our residents view us. The other part is sort of the analytics of looking at how do we compare to other cities and how they're actually providing the services. So one's a perception and one's actual analytical look, and both are equally important to come up with the answer, because it doesn't really matter what we do. If the perception of what our residents think is not good, then we're not doing it right.
The question came up to me several times about where do you get the 400 people randomly selected so that it really does represent a good cross-section of the city?
It's on, with landlines, we know obviously the area code, the prefix is coming in, and then we just randomly digitize. The computer sets up randomly, and then I filter through the computer to come up with, you know, if they're listed, we know it's a good number. They might live outside the city of Chaska, but share the prefix and everything, and then it's a screening process. On cell phones, we purchase a list. based on providers and billing centers. Incredible amount of information out there. The only thing I have to promise is that I'm not using it to sell anything, or the list providers will not share that information with me at the level that they're able to share it with a polling firm.
Right.
Than others. And then what it is with updated census information, we know the percent of households that are renters, the percent of households with seniors, with children and everything. And as you're going through and completing the calls, it obviously is taking time, and you're monitoring that to make sure, because, you know, it is possible and that's why it's 95 out of 100 cases, the statistical caveat, you might call all of Ward 1. It's possible. But as you're monitoring it going through, and you're making sure that you had a good representation with the census and the demographics. But it's a simple, once I have a cell phone number and a landline number, it's all random. I don't know names or anything. The only time we ask for any clarifying information, because confidentiality is promised, is if I don't know the address, so I can place them into a ward. And then we simply ask for the nearest cross street. We don't ask for the address, because that violates, but people get concerned when you're asking that sort of information.
Sounds good, thank you.
So as a follow-up to this, we'll be getting this, the full presentation out so people can see it. But then again, we're also going to be working with Kevin to do a deeper dive into different pieces of this to, you know, basically look at a closer look at each of these, and really sort of add in the context that Peter helped provide.
Well, like I said, it was interesting. I was here in 12, but I don't remember as strong as I do today how much this information. Maybe because this one is better.
Well, and remember where we were in 12.
Yeah, we were in a
We
tough
weren't in the
spot.
best of economic
Right.
conditions at the
Right.
time either, so.
Right.
No, but I think that really states a lot when you looked at those years going back. I mean, a lot of the reason why we are where we are is because of the work we did in those times. And
Yeah.
the decisions you made then are what are coming to fruition now.
Yes, yeah, because, a decision you make usually doesn't get fully implemented for a couple of years
Right.
before people,
5
5 years, yeah, 5 years before people notice it. No, you're right.
So,
Excellent.
cool. And I'm gonna echo that too. One of the meetings that we had that was a challenging meeting for all of us was, you would have come in right after that, and it just would not have been good timing, nor would the message, I don't know that we would have probably felt as good about the message after maybe the outcome of that meeting, but.
You didn't want to sit here till 11 either.
Well, we'd have been here till about 2:20 for the finish.
They offered me the option, and I think it makes sense. I mean, an hour and 15 minutes is a
For
long
time, too.
presentation, even if you start at
Absolutely.
7:30.
Right.
So I think it was
Far
a wise
better.
decision.
Yeah, on a less busy agenda.
good.
Great, good news.
Thank you.
Awesome, very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Very good news.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice words. I'm sure that you put some of them in there as well, so. Well, where are we? Anything else on this before we kind of close the door or move on?
No, it's very nice to hear.
Yep.